All right, well, first, I'm just gonna acknowledge all our elected officials and local officials who have joined us today, who have joined us in RSVP'd for our town hall. So which we have actually a very full house of elected officials and officials joining us. First, I want to recognize Michael Hannon, who is our Newark City Council member, CJ Kamek, our Fremont Unified School District Superintendent, Cheryl Jordan, our Milpitas Unified School District Superintendent, Dr. Eric Bishop, our Ohlone College President, Chris Peoples, our Alameda County Transit Board Director, Tara Sri Krishnan, Santa Clara County Board of Education Board Member, Claudia Rossi, Santa Clara County Board of Education Board Member, John Weed, who is on the Alameda County Water District, Diane Jones, who is on the Fremont Unified School District, Diane Shaw, who is on the Alameda County Transit Board, Alicia Marquez, who's on the Newark Unified School District, it's a board member, Elisa Martinez, who's on the Ohlone College Trustee, Kathy Kimberlin, who is the field director for Supervisor Dave Hauber. We've also got Angelica Ramos Allen, who is with the Office of Santa Clara County Supervisor Susan Ellenberg. And we have Lam Nguyen, who is from the Office of San Jose, City Council Member David Cohen. We also have Evelyn Chua, who is our council member from Milpitas, and Wendy Ho, who is Chief of Staff to Santa Clara County Supervisor Otto Lee, as well as a trustee on the Evergreen Community College Trustee as well. So hopefully I did not miss anyone there. I know there's a lot of people in the audience. Hopefully did not miss anyone, but thank you all, one and all, for joining our Legislative Update Town Hall. Of course, I'm Alex Lee. I'm the guy in the picture. Our state assembly member for the cities of Santa Clara, Northern San Jose, Milpitas, Fremont, and Newark. I currently, as a good background, I'm currently sit on these committees listed on here, which is Education, Transportation, Business and Professions, Rules, and the subcommittee on the budget for Education Finance. So do a lot of stuff on these topic issues, especially in education, given the past 2 years we've been in. So we're definitely going to be talking about education financing a lot. Just important housekeeping rules is I have our contact here, our email, phone number, website. So if you have still questions lingering today that weren't answered, or you need help with something that's come up, please do reach out to us, give us a call, give us an email. And then also, as a matter of housekeeping, whether you're watching on Facebook or on Zoom right now, please do feel free to drop some questions either in the comments or in the Q&A function below on your Zoom function. So feel free to ask your questions. I will be doing a Q&A section at the later half of this town hall. I'm just going to give an update overview right now for the beginning half. But so if you have questions, feel free to ask them during my presentation or after when we do Q&A. All right, so let's get started, shall we? Okay, well, just looking back at 2021, we are now almost 3 months into 2022. Just a recap of where we've been and how what we've been able to accomplish. We have 7 of our bills passed out of the legislature, and 5 of them were signed. 2 of them, unfortunately, were vetoed by the governor. 1 relating to public access to local government meetings, and 1 about protecting small businesses. Luckily, and I'll have some updates about that later, both of them have kind of transformed real life already, and we're going to come back with a stronger version this year, but we at least got those 7 bills passed, which is great. We also closed over 2,600 cases. That's individuals who ask us for help. Most of those cases are EDD, which is unemployment cases. So even in our area, just adjacent to Silicon Valley, we had a lot of people who lost their livelihoods quite rapidly. There's still a lot of folks struggling with unemployment and employment right now. So we want to make sure that, especially during the height of the pandemic, they were taken care of. We held at this point 10 total office hours, and those are office hours where we do virtually so far. Well, we've done 1 in person as well, but we do virtual office hour appointments where you can sign up for an appointment via Zoom, and you can have like 10, 15 minutes to chat with me about whatever's on your mind. It's been really fun doing those. So if you haven't been able to sign up for that and you're interested in that, feel free to contact your office. We'll sign you up for the next virtual office hours appointment. Literally, you can talk to me about anything that's on your mind. I've had Boy Scout troops, I've had casework come, all really great things. So we're going to be doing probably office hours again early March. We also had 12 town halls, so I guess this one would be the 13th town hall. We've done 2 highway cleanups right now. We're hopefully going to do more as the Omicron wave is finally abating. And we also hosted 4 heritage events. Before I talk about the heritage events, we also put a historic amount of money in the state budget towards tackling hate crimes and towards our education budget. This year, we're hoping to build upon that again. But this, so far, we've held 4 Heritage Month events, which you'll see in this next slide. We've held 4 of these Heritage Month events. So just recently, this month, we held our Black History Month event in Milpitas, in the Sunny Hills neighborhood, which actually in Milpitas is in Milpitas and was the first racially segregated planned neighborhood in the entire country. Little known fact in our hometown Milpitas. We also had a Latino Heritage Month in Newark, where we're at the tortilla factory right there, just in Newark right there. We also had our LGBTQ Pride Month event at Mission Coffee in Fremont. And we held a virtual AAPI Heritage Month in May 2021 when it was still not really possible to do in-person events, unfortunately, but this year, hopefully we'll be able to do a really nice one in person. So those are the events we've done so far. We're going to do more of them. It's really great to recognize local heroes who have these identities and often go unsung and unappreciated. All right, so let's go to the next one. So now we're going to talk about the state budget. So just give you an overview of the state budget, here's 2 things. One is I am a member on the state budget committee. It is not often they put members who are in their first terms, as I am, in the state budget committee, but I had expressly requested to be on the budget committee, given that we, actually at the time when we were signing up for committees and requesting them, we didn't know if we were going to be in the surplus mode we are today. The pandemic-induced recession back then was looking a lot was looking a bit more gloomy back then. And I really wanted to make sure that we were making the smart investments and protecting ourselves against austerity. Luckily, the top earners in our society and our economy have continued to earn so well that in the 21 to 22 budget, which is the one we just crafted and we're living through right now, represents a historic amount of investments in particularly a lot of areas, but especially in education, our K-12 and higher ed education. And this year, I'm going to talk a bit about our proposed budget for the 22 to 23 year. So this right now is an overview of the governor's budget. Just as a quick aside is how our budget process works is the governor proposes a budget in January. We as a legislature who control the purse strings, we go over it, we review it, we make changes, and then in June, we make the final version. So this, just so you know, is a proposed kind of outline. It's generally indicative of the direction we'll go, but doesn't mean this is necessarily set in stone what we will be spending, but it gives you a really good picture of where we're at. And that's why I think it's really important to share with you all what direction we're going for. So that's important. So anyways, I think something I really want to highlight for you all is you can see that education, which is K through 12 education, and higher ed represents the biggest segment of our budget singularly, just education, followed of course by health and human services. And I'm really proud of that, is that we used to actually in California spend way more on incarceration in our prison system than we did on our UCs and CSUs. And we finally corrected that. And now we're putting a lot more money into the CSUs, UCs, and our education system in general. All right, let's go to the next slide. All right, so what is in the budget, our historic budget for education? So last year, we actually had the highest amount of spending we've ever had for K-12. Granted, and this is especially important for our Bay Area district and our Bay Area families, is that even though we have historically, objectively, the most money, it is not quite enough yet. So this year, we're hoping to expand a lot of these programs you see on the screen, and we're hoping to get a COLA, a cost of living adjustment for our schools. The proposed amount from the governor is cresting somewhere like 3 to 5% adjustment. And as we all know right now, inflation is almost 7%, and the cost of doing business for our schools is very, very high as well. So we in the legislature are hoping to advance and push even further on that, get more money to the classroom, get more money to our educators, get more money for our kids' programs. Something I want to also highlight especially is we're going to increase our special education funding by $500 million right there. And we're also going to be implementing the Universal School Meals Program with $596 million. There likely will be more money in that for kitchen upgrades and infrastructure upgrades to make sure that no kid goes to school hungry, and we make sure that everyone is taken care of. We're also beginning to roll out universal transitional kindergarten for our really early learners, and that is going to be expected to full rollout, fully implemented by the 2025-26 school year. So we're putting down all these investments right now. There's no better investment in the long run and short term than in our education funding. Right now, there's a lot of conversations also about the state appropriation limit, which actually incentivizes us to spend more on schools and spend more in the classroom, which is great, because right now in our Bay Area schools, we definitely need a lot more money going towards our schools to not just weather the pandemic, but also transition us towards a future where a lot of kids need a lot more support, and that's just going to be the focus of it. So if folks have questions about school, the education budget specifically, feel free to drop questions about that. I'm happy to answer that, but I just want to give you an overview of the programs. But generally speaking, a lot of it's going to go towards our school. A lot of the new money we want to address is towards schools, whether infrastructure like school buses, kitchens, or ongoing funding from our Prop 98, which is the kind of funding you use for academic purposes and in general school funding. So we're set to, again, make history and spend way more money towards education. Okay, let's go to the next one. And another, of course, very topical issue is homelessness. So what is the state going to be doing about this? So historically, I would just lay out the historical lenses. Historically, the folks that the entities that address homelessness have been the nonprofits and local entities like cities and counties. But as the homelessness crisis is growing and growing and growing, and no thanks worsened by the pandemic, we as a state are stepping up to put more investments towards homelessness to make sure that we can assist localities to addressing homelessness and also build and provide supportive wraparound service housing for across the state. So the governor right now is proposing $2 billion in near-term, $2 billion more dollars in near-term needs and funding for long-term solutions, right? In that $2 billion, $1.5 billion of it is for immediate housing and treatment services for people with behavioral health needs. So that's hopefully to address getting the most vulnerable and the most folks in need off the streets quickly so that they can get into the services and support they need. It's often that while it's not representative of the entire section of all folks who are unhoused, those who have either physical, mental, or substance abuse issues definitely are the most vulnerable, and it is much, much easier to get treatment and help them along if they are stably housed than living on the streets or living in encampments. And in that regard too, 500 million of it, which is what the governor's proposing, is going to be rehousing people who are encampments. It's called the Encampment Resolution Grants Program, which is going to be accessed by, I think the intention is to be accessed by counties and cities. So that is the idea. So that we want to provide the resources to rapidly rehouse people, to rapidly get people off the streets, because we have a growing homelessness crisis that is unacceptable, and even the UN has called a humanitarian crisis. So we need to be addressing that. But this is the long term. The state's going to be stepping in, doing a lot more towards homelessness, and especially in our area, these funds will be helpful in getting people off the streets and into services, stable housing that they need to get back on their feet. All right, and then I want to highlight another great issue area for the budget is climate and transportation. So we in California pride ourselves in leading a lot in the way of trying to tackle climate change. We know that if we do not act decisively in the next decade, that we will suffer a lot of consequences in our rapidly changing climate. I mean, right now in our microclimate, you feel the swings, right? Those randomly hot winter days, very, very cold. And that's just a peek at what could happen, right? The big, more wildfires or flooding that's happening even in our baylands, or the fires in the hills. So that's why we're going to be putting a lot more money towards climate change. So that's $22.5 billion, a 1 year injection over 5 years, one time injection over 5 years to advance climate and opportunity budget and provide equitable climate solutions. And we're also going to have $750 million for projects to transform the state's bicycle and pedestrian networks. So the idea, of course, being that cars, combustion engine vehicles actually represent the largest segment of carbon emissions right now. And if we were able to transition away from that, whether through electric vehicles, mass transit, or biking and pedestrian infrastructure improvements. That's really helpful. I'm very proud that in our city of Fremont, especially, and even in San Jose, we're tackling a lot more pedestrian bicycling improvements, and hopefully that is more and more of an option to folks. And of course, we're putting in almost $1 billion towards infrastructure for zero emission vehicles, ZEVs, which largely are electric vehicles right now, but hopefully in the future hydrogen as well. So the state is really putting a big down payment on the future of transportation. And we're really going to be using that to hopefully curb our carbon emissions, because as we all know, driving is the worst form of it. And at the same time, if we have more traffic, it also is a social issue as well. And then on the next slide, you'll see more of the built natural environment, or things how we're going to combat climate change as well. So we're putting also $1.2 billion towards wildfire resilience and wildland management. So in addition to, of course, having firefighters go out and combat the fires that are ravaging our area, and of course in our hills in 2020, we had some incredibly huge wildfires that's becoming more and more the norm. We're going to put more resources towards combating fires, but also we need more resources towards wildland management. That's forest management, grasslands, etc., to make sure that there's not so much excess fuel. And I know in the East Bay Community Parks District, especially, we are doing a lot of forest mitigation to make sure that in the future, hopefully fires aren't that bad. We're also putting almost $1 billion towards water supply projects, because of course, another factor of climate change is worsening and more persistent droughts. So we're going to be putting more money towards water as well. And then we're also going to be putting $200 million towards remediation, which is capping off oil wells. So California is actually still a big producer of fossil fuel, of oil. And we are hoping that in the future, we transition out of that, right? We've transitioned out of producing oil, transition out of using oil and fossil fuels, which are super harmful to the environment, be it climate change or respiratory issues in the air. So we're going to be also be doing that. And then, of course, we put a bunch of capital expenses towards firefighters and equipments so that we can combat the now annual wildfire season, unfortunately. So that is a big overview of our budget. Wow, there's a lot of questions coming in, I can see. All right, so that's an overview of our budget. Generally, that's the direction we're going in. And again, we are subject to change these things. And that's why I think it's important to hear from you if you have budget priorities. This is the second year in a row. It does not guarantee that we have a surplus from the top earners, but it's important that we invest that in long term so everyone is lifted up. So if you have ideas or priorities, do share that with us. But now I'm going to talk about some of the exciting legislation that I have authored or co-authored this year and that we're working on, the bills that I'm working on personally. So here's a brief overview of some of our bills. We have more slides of this. We are going to be doing a Brown Act modernization bill. We're coming back at it. So the Brown Act is basically the law that governs how local governments conduct their government meetings. So this bill, AB 1944, we're coming back to it, is to make sure that the public can access Zoom options or call-in options to make public comment. So you don't have to sit there for 5-7 hours just to make a 1-minute phone call. And there's a lot of great cities in our district that already have these hybrid options, but this would be to preserve it for the future. This bill would also provide that local electeds under certain circumstances can also participate remotely. So just as we do in the pandemic right now with hybrid circumstances, we can allow local officials who, because a lot of local officials are actually part-time. So hopefully that folks that, struggle with getting childcare or immunocompromised or whatever have you, from time to time participate remotely, but to make sure that the public can participate remotely is really important so that your voice is heard in your city council, county supervisors, or special districts, what have you. We're also bringing back our wealth tax, which is styled, and we're actually working very closely with U.S. Senator Elizabeth Warren on this, is our styled wealth tax on the mega millionaires and billionaires. This is a taxation on assets of exceeding $50 million or more. And these are assets that does not even include real estate, no real estate property. So your house does not count on this. There's a lot of people in our district that, if you only count their house, we'd all be millionaires, right? But no, that doesn't count. So this is for the top 0.07% of Californians who you could probably name them, who are obscenely very, very rich. And if they are able to pay their fair share, then we are able to invest much more in our social services, our schools, and even towards homelessness. You have probably seen before in previous elections or talks about millionaires taxes or things like that, but those are always income. Why wealth taxes are important is because when you graduate to a certain level of wealth, of a billionaire wealth or even a mega millionaire wealth, you no longer really need income, right? Because you can leverage your wealth and your power and your positionality in society by owning things. That's why you hear a lot of famous examples of CEOs, very influential CEOs who don't take any salary or barely take any salary, and that's how the very, very rich, and there's a great ProPublica report out there, actually avoid their tax burden. The effective taxation rate of mega millionaires and billionaires is actually much lower than the effective taxation of middle-class families, because generally speaking, we're raising money through income, but they have wealth through ownership of assets. So that's why it's important. It's an important distinction, and that could actually raise $22 billion towards our schools and our services. But it's important that while the middle class continues to pay our fair share through parcel, property, income, sales, and all the various taxes out there, that we also ask that the top earners also pay their fair share. This is literally the 0.07%. And then we're also doing a really exciting bill is juror payment. So we are going to be doing a bill with our courts to allow jurors, so if you serve on jury duty, to get reimbursement for taking public transit. Right now, you only get reimbursement if you drive somewhere. So it's not as fair, I would say. And so we're trying to promote jury diversity and making sure that the justice is carried out in a fair way. We want to have more diverse pools of jurors. So that one's really cool. All right, let's go to the next one. Here's a big bill that we're also working on, is to stop foreign influence in California elections. Right now, and perhaps maybe even more salient now, is that there are a lot of foreign investment sovereign wealth funds, essentially, especially wealth funds generated from oil revenues. And that could be, of course, Russian state-owned enterprises or Saudi-owned enterprises, or even Norwegian ones or European ones. But they have a lot of control and ownership in our publicly traded companies. And that is actually a backdoor in which foreign influence money can leak into our elections. Just as an example to show you, in 1982, foreign investors owned 5% of all corporate equity, 5%. And now in it's a little higher now, but 2019, 40% of all US equities, 40% is owned by foreign investors. And that is actually a backdoor way where they can use it to influence our elections, influence candidates. And this is why it's really important that, when I got up there in my first day, it's important we tackle the role of corporate influence in a democracy, but especially foreign influence. This is a big problem even federally, and we want to make sure we're closing this back door and not having undue foreign state actors have influence, right? And especially in the climate we live today, where we are making a lot of sanctions and economic decisions against other actors as they act aggressively. We want to make sure that we're closing these back doors and not fomenting things that threat our own American sovereignty. So it's important that we ensure our elections are free of foreign influence, and we have to protect California's democratic self-interest. So this is a great bill working on 1819. All right. So the next bill, this is also a great one, is we are also expanding compliance with the American with Disabilities Act. So in San Jose, interestingly enough, there have been a lot of unfortunate lawsuits about ADA compliance, especially to our small businesses. So we're actually doing a bill, AB 2164, to provide more resources to small businesses to become into compliance with American Disability Act. Of course, it's not the intention of small business owners to exclude people who have different abilities and different access needs, but we want to make sure that especially folks are able to access these funds and make the renovations or compliance necessary. And this is going to be a good one, especially as we get out of the pandemic and assist more small businesses. So this one is really important. And especially if you know someone or you are someone who has experience with ADA compliance or needing help with this, please just let us know. Definitely use your stories to help pass this bill more. Okay, and then we're going to move on to some of my favorite area of legislation working on is our housing bills. So we're doing 3 special housing bills this year. One is I'm going to do a bill that prohibits pet rent. So pet rent, if you're not familiar, is a rent charge to your pets, your feline or your canine friends. It is a kind of more new practice, in which case sometimes landlords are charging people who live in their homes a pet security deposit, a pet rent, a pet fee, what do you call it? But this is just specific pet rent, which is a monthly fee assessed for your for your pet. And it's prohibitive, especially on low-income folks who have pets, who have dogs, who have pets, whatever. But of course, like if there is property damage, we want to rely on the security deposit. But pet rent, which is a monthly non-recoverable fee, is pretty punitive for our pet families. And we want to make sure that practices is not there anymore, especially in a very competitive and expensive housing market that we have in California, in the Bay Area. We're also going to bring back our ALICE Act reform, which is stopping property speculators, especially those real estate moguls who, well, they're from California too, but out of state as well, who speculate on property. And this is especially nefarious of a practice because ALICE Act only specifically applies to rent-controlled buildings. So these are buildings who have already by nature vulnerable low-income folks. And then you have especially big Blackstone-like entities that come in, buy up the building, kick everyone out, and then they sell each individual apartment as a condo for $1 million each. There's a lot of money to be made in the system, but it causes actually more homelessness, more displacement. And as we're in this housing crisis, we have to make sure less people fall into homelessness, less people fall through the cracks. And that's why it's really important to protect the most vulnerable. So yes, of course, we need to provide more options for people to live and have more housing available, but we really need to curb the kind of out of control speculation that's happening because we have an over commodification of housing. And I'm sure folks know this even happening in the single family home market. There's a lot of folks who see the hot commodity that housing has become, and it really prices people out. And in this case, it really evict them to make a higher rate of return. This bill, we're working very closely to make sure that it exempts small landlords, true small landlords, because this ALICE Act loophole is being gamed by big corporations and property speculators. And this bill originally was meant to protect mom and pop landlords, has now been gamed, just as many systems in our society have been gamed by corporate interests, those who seek more maximum profit. But we are going to close that loophole. Another really important bill that I'm very proud to have worked on since my first day in office is social housing. So social housing is publicly developed, publicly owned, and publicly maintained housing for all income levels. And this is our solution to answering the question of, well, who is going to build all the affordable housing we need? We know right now that the nonprofit housing folks are doing their darnest, but they are not able to solve and meet the big demands we have, which is awesome. We can still let them do that stuff. But we also know the private market, which is the lion's share of development that happens across our cities, who build for profit and answer to their shareholders, also want to maximize their profit as much as possible. This means the highest rate of return on housing, the most expensive housing they can sell, the most expensive housing they can rent. And then very often they build very little minute, if at all, affordable housing by law. So what we want to propose is what's in the middle, to fill the gap that's in the middle. We want to create a state enterprise to build and develop housing so that when we have affordable housing, it's not a NASCAR style letterhead of corporations, of nonprofits, of state, local entities all funded together, but a streamlined effort and an enterprise to build affordable housing for all. It has local control built into it, resident governance, and also to make sure we factor in local jurisdictional preferences as well. But this is based off really successful models in Europe and Asia, where they provide housing as a human right, as a municipal good. Think roads and schools, right? It doesn't matter how much you make to drive on a road or how much you make to go to a public school. It's a universal good that's available to everyone. And just like they do in Austria or in Singapore, we want to make sure that all folks can live in integrated neighborhoods together. There's no stigma, there's no concentration of poverty, no concentration of gated communities of wealth, a true way to get more folks housed. And this is really important to do so during this housing crisis. And I really believe this is the way we can provide housing as a human right. It's one of the bills that my staff and I have worked on personally really hard for a long time. And it's also really great because it relies on a principle called revenue neutrality. And revenue neutrality just means it's self-sustaining financially, because that you will have higher earners, people with higher incomes, and people on lower incomes in the same neighborhood. They'll be able to self-cycle and support itself, just as they do frankly in the private market, but except that those profits in the private market go to some shareholder on Wall Street. But this way, this money goes back to sustaining those neighborhoods or building more affordable housing throughout the portfolio. So it's very exciting to be able to do this project and do this bill and be able to build more affordable housing, because we certainly need it. And revenue neutrality is a great thing that our friends in Europe and Asia have figured out for a long time, but we'll have rental opportunities, we'll have ownership opportunities, but this is a long-term project of mine I hope to carry out for a couple of years to get the enterprise started and then get all that in motion, right? We have a lot of great examples even of in practice, social housing, which is a lot of the housing built by UCs or school districts. So that's a public entity taking on the construction of housing. Usually it's under the guise of workforce housing or student housing, but this would be true universal housing as a good. And we're hoping to be able to do that and wouldn't need subsidies, wouldn't have to rely on tax subsidies forever. It'd be self-sustaining, which is awesome. So, okay, now we're going to talk about some of the bills that I have co-authored this session, which just basically means that I am working on it as a conjunction with other legislators from across the state. I'm just not the primary person working on it, but there's a lot of great authors on here you'll see that we're working on. I'm working with Assemblymember Luz Rivas from Los Angeles. We're going to ban the sale of cigarette and e-cigarette cigar filters and single-use vapes. Obviously, vaping has become quite a public health issue right now, so this would be helpful of that. Oh, yes. And then I'm working with Senator Josh Becker from the Peninsula to usher in a seamless transit network in the Bay Area. Right now, we have 27 Bay Area agencies across our transit agents across the Bay Area. And we want to streamline them together so they can work better and hand in hand. So very exciting. Hopefully that will produce some really great results for our public transit system. And of course, I was a joint author on AB 1400 with Assemblymember Alex Lee from San Jose to establish universal single-payer healthcare. That effort, unfortunately, is paused for this year, but it will be coming back next year. And we are committed to getting universal healthcare for all. Studies, and all the evidence shows that it is much cheaper and much more effective to have a single-payer universal system than relying on what we have in America, which is a Byzantine mess of healthcare industry and insurance agencies. But this is really important because even in Canada, which is a famous single-payer country, they started off on the provincial level. And once we start, which is the equivalent of their states, if we are able to accomplish this in California, we can hopefully accomplish this as a nation and really provide healthcare for all, because medical debt is one of the leading causes of poverty and bankruptcy that even exists even in California. So healthcare for all, still on the table, still working on that one. Just unfortunately had a setback this year. Okay, let's go to the next one. And another really great bill we're working on is Assembly Bill 2764 with Assemblymember Nazarian from Los Angeles. And we are banning the expansion and creation of new factory farms and slaughterhouses. And if you are not familiar with this practice, well, it's pretty cruel and inhumane. It's bad for the consumer because of all the chemicals they use. It's bad for the workers because it's really terrible work, and also the chemicals they have to come in contact with. And of course, the animals. This is industrialized mass slaughter, industrialized treatment of our animals. And frankly, I think even our livestock animals deserve a lot better treatment of that. So we're banning the expansion of that. So we have a more humane agricultural practices and livestock practices. This is really bad. We're also working with Assemblymember Bonson from Oakland to combat hate crimes towards Asian elders and combat what's called street harassment. There is certainly a lot of anti-Asian sentiment and unfortunate things that happen, and it's usually classified, if it's not a hate crime, it's street harassment, but we're really trying to address this issue again. In the budget, in 21 to 22 budget, we got almost $160 million towards addressing hate crimes, and a lot of that money was towards community-based organizations and education. And we're really happy that a lot of community partners in our area were able to access those funds that are going to be developing programs, because the one way to really ensure that we have less ignorance and hate in the world is to really have a better understanding, right? Because as long as there's a fear of the other, there's going to be a lot of violence. Well, not always, but there is more tendency towards violence. We're also bringing back a bill that I had done last year with Cristina Garcia from Los Angeles, that we're ensuring that schools are not built in toxic or hazardous locations. This stems actually from, well, there are also examples in Los Angeles of this, but in Fremont, there was a private school built basically right next to a cement factory, caused a lot of, a lot of not great things and to be in the air. And we're bringing this bill back to make sure that our schools, whether they public, charter, or private, are safely located so that when you drop your kids off to school, you don't have to worry if they're breathing in toxins or being exposed to batteries or exposed to all sorts of things. So it's important that we safely site our schools. So that is an overview right now of some of the bills that we're working on. There's actually even more bills that we're working on right now that we hope to share with you all. But that is a state of where we're at right now in terms of the budget and in terms of the legislative package. And I know there are, wow, a lot of questions in the Q&A. So we're going to do some Q&A right now. If folks have, I'm just gonna say, if folks have questions right now, please feel free to put them in the chat in the Q&A function, whatever is very convenient for you. And I also wanted to acknowledge that Derek Grazzi, a trustee for Mount Pleasant Elementary School District, has actually joined us, and he is also a Santa Clara County School Board Association Legislative Action Committee member. So thank you for joining, Derek. But we're going to do some Q&A questions. So think about the questions if you have any. And since we have so many questions and so limited amount of time, feel free to also ask them offline or come to our office hours. So I am going to be answering some of your questions right now. But I'm going to take a sip of tea before I do that. All right. So first question comes from Josh from Fremont. Josh asks, please discuss your thoughts on the many high-density housing projects that are being built and have been built. Do you support similar developments in the future? Now, that's a great question and relating to their social housing conversation we had. So short answer is we need housing. We need the low-density housing. We need high-density housing. We need everything in between. I think especially in America, and especially for folks with immigrant backgrounds, since Asia or Europe, they know there's a lot of middle ground between the two. Social housing is a great way for us to do that, to build the middle ground of housing, middle density, middle income housing, and also make sure, most importantly, that it's not just a private developer who is profiteering off of the housing prices. So that's really important. So while we also need high density housing around transportation hubs, like we have in our BART areas, we also need to have, housing that fits the gradient of neighborhoods and that fits in with every other neighborhood and has also the room and availability. I think social housing is going to be an answer to able to do that, because right now, from a private development standpoint, if you're min-maxing towards profit, you are kind of predisposed towards building a certain type of housing, which I'm sure many folks can imagine what that type is, but we can also build a lot more different types of housing. And as we make sure that we are legalizing more forms of housing and allowing homeowners and property owners to do what they can for their home to address the housing crisis, I think it's gonna be good. So short answer is we need all types of housing, high density, low density, middle density, all that kind of stuff. And it's important we have that balance and making sure where they're sited and who's living in them is important. The other big question is who profits from it, right? And we want to make sure that the community is profiting from it, not a private, not just private interests, right? Okay, let's see. Patrick from Morgan Hill asks, what is the state doing to assure its residents that they have the water they need? So that's a great question. As I mentioned in our budget panel, our budget slides, we were talking about all the budget investments we're putting in towards making sure we have drought resiliency and money towards water infrastructure. I think what's promising and interesting is I know I get a lot of comments from folks about desalination, which, if you don't know, is basically turning seawater into drinkable water. While that is certainly something that Southern California explores much more than we do, because they are in a desert climate, which is worsening because of climate change. I think we have an incredible promise in water purification and water recycling. So in Santa Clara County, we actually have what's called the Silicon Valley Advanced Water Purification Center, which is basically taking wastewater and runoff water and hyper treating and hyper filtering it. I've drank this water before, and treating it and turning it into usable water. I think that's also a really great way, because while we can conserve and build new ways to capture water or have more infrastructure water, we also need to think about how we can upcycle and recycle the water. So that's really important, especially as our Bay Area grows and grows and grows and becomes more and more urbanized. Okay, and here's another question. Lisa from Milpitas. And yeah, if you have any questions, just feel, wow, the questions in the Q&A just doubled. So thank you for all asking questions. All right, Lisa from Milpitas asks, how are we going to reduce carbon emissions by half by 2030 to avoid climate catastrophe? Exactly. That's just 8 years from now. And there hasn't been much progress in California or anywhere. Yeah, I think it's incredibly frustrating that, especially in California, we are not making, in America, right, we're not making the progress we should be towards climate change. So I think we're really pushing the envelope right now to try to phase out the carbon economy, the fossil fuel economy, right? We know that we must transition away from burning coal, burning gas, and having engines that run on fossil fuel. So it's kind of frustrating. Sometimes we aren't making all those decisions to get there. We had a bill, actually, I co-authored it, to ban the new sale of combustion engine vehicles by, I think, like 2040, which is way off from 2030. And that bill was stymied. So the oil industry is well and alive and very active in trying to preserve themselves as long as possible. So that's really frustrating. But we're going to keep pushing that to make sure that we end the fossil fuel economy. And then, of course, at the same side, making sure we have more opportunities for folks to generate their own energy, like solar, roof solar, or wind. I'm sorry, large scale solar, rooftop solar, or wind power, like really expanding our processes of energy creation. And then also hopefully building more sustainable communities that don't sprawl out into the wildlands, because that generates more traffic, generates more emissions, generates more power usage, all those bad things, and also destroys our natural lands. So we have to think about this as much as we can in our built environment and maximize towards solving climate change. So it's really unfortunate. So yeah, I share your frustration there, and we keep pushing these bills. All right. Catherine asks, what about approaching the homelessness issue from both directions, not just housing the homeless, but keeping at-risk folks in their current homes? Well, that's a great point. The homelessness crisis is exacerbated right now by two things, right? So if you imagine homelessness, just totality of people who are homeless is right here, and this is the amount of people that we say can rehouse, can help and get people on their feet. The problem is the rate at which people become homeless far exceeds right now our capacity to house people, to shelter people, to do all those things. Making sure people don't fall into destitute poverty, live in their cars, get evicted is really important. And that's why I'm pushing my LSAC reform bill. That is a very specific type of homelessness or an eviction that's caused by people who want to profit, right? They buy buildings full of low-income tenants who've lived there for a long time, especially seniors, kick them out and sell the house or property, right? Which in the end doesn't even generate any new properties. It's the same amount of properties, and people fall into homelessness. So it's really important that we are also keeping the social safety net strong, because right now, unfortunately, there are a lot of people falling through the cracks, and that's why you're seeing increasing homelessness and increasing strife. Tara Sri Krishnan from our Santa Clara County Board of Education asked, what accomplishment are you most proud of from last year? I'm very proud that we are pushing the envelope when it comes to housing and making sure that we're getting more and more resources. While you might not see my name affixed to our budget asks, we were very successful in getting more money towards housing and housing opportunities. We build more housing, affordable housing, as well as rehousing people who are unhoused. And also very proud that you have to remember, like early on this time last year when there was no vaccines for schools, I really pushed a lot of the conversations about making sure we're not mandating a full in-person return to instruction. Now, whether or not you have feelings about in-person classroom instruction or not, at that time, there was not even an adult vaccine. And I really wanted to make sure that we were not putting more families at risk. So we created, obviously, the incentive program to allow schools to opt in to do in-person instruction, but we also have to have some flexibility, especially back then, for people who were afraid of getting affected by COVID. Luckily right now, Omicron is subsiding a bit. It's still bad right now, but we have to stay vigilant. And in-person instruction is always the best, but we also have to make sure that we're protecting the safety of the children, of the families, and of the educators. But luckily, we're in a much different place than we were last year now. All right, Diane Shaw from the AC Transit Board asks, thank you for the pet rent bill. Can it be updated to not allow landlords to prevent animals? A lot of people have a hard time finding a place to rent if they have animals. This is very true. There is a lot of practice in the rental market. If you are a renter or a recent renter, you'll know this struggle. There's a lot of restrictions on the type of animals you can have. Sometimes for good reasons, sometimes for not so valid reasons, but it's very restrictive. In this bill, we're not going to be tackling that issue, unfortunately, but we're going to be first tackling the issue of the additional fee for those who even get in. A good question, Diane. Jody asks, thank you. Oh, what's the schedule for bringing back AB 854? Thank you. So AB 854 is the LS Act reform, and I do plan, hoping everything lines up, we do plan to bring it back this year as a new bill, because luckily it did not get killed on the floor. It can actually come back again. So we're going to bring the bill back this year. We feel very confident with the new. This is a quick background, is the Assembly has 4 vacancies right now, because we're down a couple votes. It makes passing things harder, but as those vacancies get filled, we are in a better and better place to pass it. So we're going to bring it back hopefully this year. If not, then next year, but for sure this year. But for sure next year, if not this year. Shayna asks, how can we fund, educate, and prepare our communities for fire safety and home safety issues? Great question. We host every now and then things with CAL FIRE and our fire departments about ways to protect your homes, especially if you live on what's called the wildland urban interface, which is like the hills, right? You think about it, the hills. So there's a lot of fire dangers there. Shayna, please do stay in touch with us about how you can get more tips about that and resources. I'm not as well versed as expert on those issues, but we're going to be doing more of those events in the future and providing more resources to make sure that folks are prepared for fire, whether it be normal structural fire or wildfires. Ganesh asks, what is the actual status of the social housing bill? Did it pass or is it still in discussion? It's still pending right now. We are up for our first committee votes in April. So AB 2053 is the Social Housing Act. And so we're going to have a move in the process starting in spring, which will be very exciting. Okay, and then Jane asks, will you support AB 1599 to repeal Prop 47, making drugs and stealing illegal again? So stealing is still currently illegal. I want that just to be clear. AB 1599, just to be clear too, is a Republican bill that wants to repeal Prop 47. But this is something I think is important for folks to understand. If you're hearing that a crime cannot be held accountable because of Prop 47, you should really ask those entities why they're not doing their job. Even if it is more difficult, they can still go persecute and they still can take the actions, right? But what's important about Prop 47 also is that it is a voter-initiated ballot measure. It cannot be changed by the legislature. It has to be done on the ballot. It was passed in 2014, so it was passed in 2014, like just as I was, I think, able to vote. I'm not even sure yet. I turned 18. Anyways, it passed in 2014, and it was passed by the voters. And by California Constitution, about a proposition that is initiated by voters can only be overturned by being on the ballot. Now, can we make some fixes to make sure people are held accountable and that we have different justice mechanisms? We can definitely do that. But I want to make sure that folks are understanding that Prop 47 is not the sole reason why people cannot be held accountable or do these things. There's a lot of excuses out there from entities that don't want to do the work of holding people accountable, and that's unfortunate. I don't know what to say about that, but we need to make sure that we have all the options on the table. Right now, things do seem scary and feel that way, but there are a lot of ways to address crime. Even though, of course, historically, even if you look at the 80s, crime has fallen drastically. It's just this time during the pandemic is slightly spiked a little bit, but we have to make sure that holistically we're doing all the things we can. But drugs are still illegal as well. Well, of course, depends on what drug you're talking about. But yeah, so it's important that we have all the options on the table to solve these crises. And Prop 47, like I said, has to be repealed on the ballot. And look, I say this, it is not an easy thing for politicians, but I say this is because you need to be told what the real answer is. If a politician or someone is telling you, we just pass this bill, the prop will be overturned, that's not actually how it works. We actually have to have a citizen initiative measure, and that's how it really works. And I think it's a disservice to tell people not disingenuous answer, honestly. So yeah, I continue to work on these public safety issues, and it's still a priority for me. Okay. Yes, these slides, Miriam, these slides will be shared after the town hall. To all the folks who registered via Zoom will be shared. A council member Chua asks, how do we avail of the AB 2164 funds for our residents? Thanks, the ADA fund. So council member is referring to the ADA compliance funds. So once we pass the bill and get it in the budget, we're going to try to make sure that especially folks in our area are applying for these grants and make sure they get it. It's actually based on a program from San Jose. So and it's sponsored by the city of San Jose, this bill. So hopefully we will be able to get the money out to folks who need it. And it'll be kind of a regular thing people apply for. And as that program gets set up in future years, we're going to make sure people have opportunity to apply for it. All right. I'm going to take a sip of tea. Wow, there's a lot of questions. Thank you all for the immense. I'm trying to figure out all the questions. All right. Anonymous had asked, how is Soba doing? My cat, Soba's doing great. She's napping right now. All right. Let's see. Miguel asks, can you talk about declining enrollment in ADA? How will funds help this area? So this is a different ADA acronym, I'm assuming. So ADA in the school context is average daily attendance. So in the Bay Area, what we have an issue of is declining enrollment, which is as it becomes more and more expensive to live in the Bay Area, there are less and less new families, which means if you looked at say a population demographic graph, you will have less and less children entering the school system, which has serious ramifications towards our school system, meaning there's less and less pupils attending, and all sorts of funding issues. ADA is the current way we fund schools based on average daily attendance, which means that's why they take a roll in class and they ask them to be there. I think as a state, we're moving much more towards enrollment-based funding of education. Now, this is very education funding wonkiness for people if they're interested, which is essentially saying you have 1,000 students at your school, you should be paid for 1,000 students rather than how often do those 1,000 students come to class? Whether or not they come to class all the time, you're still planning to educate 1,000 students, right? That's just how schools are designed. So we are moving closer and closer towards that. Declining enrollment, of course, is a larger issue that we're also trying to address via the budget, but it is a big issue. But I think enrollment-based education will help you match the education funding towards the actual class sizes that we have. So it's going to be important. All right, how are we doing on time? I'm trying to answer more questions. All right, Sherry asks, how are we ensuring that all students have access to distance learning, both with equipment, individual Chromebooks, and internet access? Great question. It's very highly dependent on your school district, but I would say all our school districts have done a really great job with it, is to make sure that families have the equipment for it. Each district has different programs they roll it out, but at the state level, we're providing a lot of the money and the resources for distance learning equipment or all that kind of COVID adaptations. And it's really up to schools to adapt and figure out what's best for them. But I think it's, so we set out the money to do that. We also set money to do more internet access and broadband service, because even in urban areas, there's still a lot of internet outages or lack of coverage, per se. Vanette asks from San Jose, what is status of Proposition 19, which is in conflict with Prop 13? Your stance on would be helpful. I believe there are advocates still trying to repeal Prop 19. So Prop 19, to be very brief about it, is we changed, there's a lot in it. We changed how we did inherited property tax. Yes, inherited property tax rates from just simply whenever you start owning your property to only being applied to owner occupied. There was also that you could take your property tax rate if you're a senior or a fire victim and you take it with you. I know Prop 19 is complicated. It's still being implemented right now. There's some good parts to it. There's some not so great parts about it. I was openly, unfortunately, opposed to Prop 19 because I didn't believe in the taking, it's complicated, right? And I know that there's some headaches with it. I understand the ability that if we change how we do with Prop 19, we can fund our services better, which is great. And I do think there's a lot of unfairness right now with the Prop 13. Like if you bought your house in the last decade, 5 years, and you paid $1 million for it, or are in the process of paying $1 million for it, your tax rate is astronomically higher than your neighbor who might have had it since 1980. I think there's an inherent unfairness of that, and it's going to be more and more of a problem. But yeah, I think Prop 19, I think there's going to be more fixes to it. What else we can say about it? But there are going to be more fixes to it. If you're having trouble personally with it, I would really encourage you to reach out to their county property tax assessors to figure that out, because sometimes it's kind of difficult for people too. But yeah. All right, I'm gonna try to do 2 more questions. Let's see. Felix asks, I like the idea of having the 1% pay more to end homelessness, hunger, lack of healthcare, and to pay for climate action. Some say the wealth tax won't be effective because the 1% would just move to Nevada or Texas, and a higher income capital gains tax would work better. What's your view on this? So look, in California, we do have a pretty good high income and capital gains tax. In fact, actually, I'm just going to give it to you, unbiased, but Lyft is actually going to be putting a high income earner of, I think, like over 250,000 towards, I think, clean energy or something. Look, Lyft is doing this. So, but they're going to be putting that on the ballot. So that's for you to decide how you feel about that. But I think we have a relatively effective income and capital gains tax system. But why I really want to focus on the top 1% is because assets are always untaxed assets, right? That's how a lot of folks avoid taxation, is if you keep it unrealized, right? I think we've done a lot when it comes to income and all those great things, but we really need to make sure we are focusing on the untaxed assets. And also to the argument that, well, the top super rich will just move. There's 2 things to that. Well, 3 things to that. Studies always show that higher earners don't move as much as lower income earners, and that might be for an very apparent reason. The cost of living is so high that they have to move. For high income earners, it's a premium to live in really great places. So, I mean, they might as well just keep living here. Our bill also factors in, moving out, if that happens to be the case, because we're trying to also build in against tax avoidance. And the third thing is, look, remember, we're talking about billions level, right? You're the billions level of wealth, you can always quote unquote escape, right? If we had a national wealth tax, the argument would be made that they escaped to Monaco or Switzerland, and we've had a global one, they would escape to the moon, right? They should create their own rockets. So it's important that we try our best in it and stop always, I think, shortchanging ourselves when it comes to taxing those who don't pay their fair share, but also just put more and more stuff, more burden on the middle class and working class. So that's unfortunate. I know we're running out of time, so I just want to appreciate everyone for asking so many questions. If you did not get your question answered this time, please do try to reach out to us personally. There are over 60 unread. Wow, there are over 60 unread questions. So there are a lot of great questions there. I'm really deeply sorry that I could not answer all of them, but please do feel free to call our office, email us, contact us website, or come to my office hours. I'm happy to talk about the issues or get your thoughts on some issues. But really do thank you for all participating in our town hall. We'll be having more in the future. Stay in touch with us on social media, website, all the great stuff. And hope you all stay safe out there, and hope that we can help you in any way. Just contact us. So thank you so much all for this wonderful town hall, and I will be seeing you out there.